Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we have a new poll from Emerson College Polling, which goes over the 2025 national profile for August, as well as an early glimpse at the 2028 presidential election and some new news that Democratic Governor of California, Gavin Newsom, has been skyrocketing in this 2028 Democratic primary. So let's break it all down. This poll was released on August 29th, 2025. From Emerson, and a new Emerson College Polling national survey finds that President Donald Trump currently has a 45% job approval rating compared to a 47% disapproval rating, overall a net negative of 2. Since last month, the president's approval rating has slipped by about 1 point, while his disapproval held at 47. And the chart here shows the trends. Back in January, Trump was up 49 to 41, February 48-42 approved, March 48-43 approved, March 3rd, March 10th goes down to 47-45. In April, it was even at 45-45. June, Trump's approval goes to disapproval 46-45. July, Trump's approval goes up 1 to 46, but disapproval also goes up to 47. Whereas in August, the disapproval remains at 47 and his approval goes down to 45. So the trend for Trump's approval rating has been that's been going down, being negative for a little bit now by about a point or so, and it really just continues to go down that way, down another percentage point. As for 2028, California Governor Gavin Newsom now leads in the 2028 Democratic presidential primary with 25% of support. That is a 13-point increase from the Emerson poll back in June. That is a very big jump in just about 2 months or so, this far out from 2028. 16% support former Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg, while 11% support the former Vice President Kamala Harris, 2024 Democratic nominee as well. 5% support Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, 4% support Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, and New York Congresswoman AOC, all at 4%. Governor Gavin Newsom's support surged across key demographic groups, highlighted by a 12-point increase among voters under 30 from 6 to 18%, and in 18-point increase among voters over 70, 13 to 31, and a 14-point increase among both black, 9 to 23%, and white, 10 to 24% among voters. Spencer Kimball, the executive director of Emerson Polling, noted. So that's what the numbers look like, and you can see here in the past few polls the change of this. Newsom back in June was at 12%, now he's at 25%. Buttigieg remains constant at 16%, Kamala Harris falls down 2% from 13% to 11%, and undecided still at 23% now is down to 16%. So Pete Buttigieg did not lose any support. Kamala Harris did lose 2%, but Newsom, going up by about 13 points or so, he didn't just take votes away from Kamala Harris, he also cut in significantly into the undecided margin and at least 1 or 2 points in the margins of other candidates as well. On the Republican side of things for 2028, right now, Republican Vice President J.D. Vance starts out with over half, 52% of the vote, followed by Secretary of State Marco Rubio with 9% and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Obviously, seeming like right now, if J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio are the top 2 contenders, if they were to team up, that would essentially put the Republican primary out for 2028. That would be the unified ticket going into 2028. That has been a rumor that may be happening, but we'll have to wait and see how that all goes. In a hypothetical 2028 general election matchup between Vice President J.D. Vance and Governor Gavin Newsom of California, the potential candidates are tied with 44% support each, respectively. 12% are undecided. In the July Emerson National Poll, 45% supported Vance, while 42% supported Newsom. So based on these numbers, Vance has gone down about 1 point and Newsom has gone up about 2%. Newsom's most recent gains are largely driven by younger voters 18 to 29. After splitting this group in June 39 to 38, he now holds a clear lead of 45 to 28, Kimball said. So this is certainly a very big development here. Even though we're still very far out from 2028, Gavin Newsom, despite not only raising at the Democratic primary level, getting his votes up, he's also seems to be gaining on J.D. Vance and the general election level. It also shows Vance around 44-44 in a tied race with 12% undecided, shows that what we expect, Newsom versus Vance, which by many, right after the 2024 presidential election, when people are asked, well, what do you think it's going to be for 28, 4 years from now? I think Newsom versus Vance was a lot of the first matchup that came to people's minds, and it shows a tied race between Vance and Newsom if that were to happen. When asked about the idea of California's congressional redistricting, 56% of voters said it is a bad idea, while 44% said it is a good idea. On a separate question, Texas, 54% called the redistricting a bad idea, 46% said it is a good idea. Support for redistricting looks similar overall for Texas and California, but the partisan swings tell a different story. In Texas, 77% of Republicans back redistricting compared to 44% in California. Meanwhile, 52% of Democrats support redistricting in California, while only 21% do in Texas. The poll also goes over President Trump's decision to bring the National Guard into Washington, D.C., with 48% of voters disapproving of Trump deploying the National Guard to 19 states to assist ICE, while 44% approve of the action. Overall, though, the opinion among U.S. voters is split regarding Trump sending the National Guard to combat crime in different U.S. cities. When it comes to Washington, D.C., overall, Trump is approved of by +3. When it comes to L.A., Trump is down 4. New York, Trump is down 5. Chicago, Trump is down 5. And Boston, which has been making a lot of news recently, is down 7 based on that issue. On the top issues for this poll, it also mentions that the remaining top issue is the economy at 33%, up 2 points from July, followed by threats to democracy at 24, immigration 12, and healthcare at 9. 41% of voters say their family's finances are worse off than they were a year ago, up 4 points from July. 28% say they are better off financially than a year ago, a 4-point decrease, and 31% say they are about the same. So that's really interesting, and for the purpose of today's video, going over the 2028 part, I'm going to leave it at that. It also talks about some other issues as well in the poll. But this is very interesting, seeing Gavin Newsom now rising up this much in this poll. So just to show you, the prior average had Kamala Harris up 9.3%, the race to the White House average. Following this Emerson College poll being put in, Harris still around 9.3%, but Gavin Newsom is clearly skyrocketing, and I'm not even sure the poll's been factored into that from race to the White House. Newsom, this is the first poll he's seen in a while with Harris in the race that has him leading. I'm not sure there has been one that has him and Harris that has Newsom leading before this one. So clearly you're showing that Gavin Newsom right now is the hot hand of the Democratic primary. He's been one of the most vocal critics of President Trump in the last few weeks or so. And it seems in the 2020 Democratic primary right now, he is certainly being rewarded for being so combative with the president. He is now in first place of the Democratic primary. And it's an interesting snapshot to take right now towards the end of August in 2028 or in 2025. Because come 2028, when the Democratic primary happens and the Democratic nominee is decided, I wonder if Gavin Newsom is going to be the Democratic nominee, or will someone else rise up and take the mantle. But right now, National Democrats want someone that seems to be a fighter that will fight against President Trump. Gavin Newsom is certainly doing that the most right now, and he is being rewarded by about a 9-point lead in the Democratic primary. On the Republican side of things, also very clear right now, J.D. Vance is in first place, and he'll likely continue to be in first place. If he runs for president in 2028, he will be, in all likelihood, the Republican nominee. And again, as I mentioned earlier in the video, I think the idea of Marco Rubio being the vice president to J.D. Vance is something that very well could be on the table, and it's something that I bet behind closed doors is probably being explored and talked about between Vance and Rubio and their respective teams for potentially 2028. Now, obviously, we're still a very far ways away from the 2028 election. Only a handful of polls have been done, but for Vance versus Newsom, 44.4% to 43.5% in the poll. That rounds up to 44 and rounds down to 44, essentially a tied race in this election. Just to give you an idea of what it looked like in 2024, the presidential race, Donald Trump won 312 electoral votes, 226. Trump got 49.8% of the popular vote. Kamala Harris got 48.3%, so overall about a 1.5% win for President Trump at the popular vote, national vote level, so 1.5%. Based on this Emerson poll that we're looking between Vance and Newsom, 44.4 to 43.5 is roughly a lead of 0.9% for J.D. Vance against Gavin Newsom. So just to give you a little bit of exercise here, going from 0.9 to 1.5 is about a 0.6% shift towards the Democrats. If just based off the 2024 results, we can actually do a 0.6% shift just to see if anything changes. I'm not sure any state was close enough for that shift to be the case, but we'll see here if anything did shift in those numbers. Yeah, really not so much. A little bit more of a Democratic shift towards them, other than maybe seeing a little bit more blue in the bluer areas, but that's not really enough of a seismic shift The Rust Belt states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, all remain in the Republican category. We do see the margins, though. Wisconsin gets even more close. Michigan falls under 1 point, and Arizona falls under 5 points. Other than that, everything pretty much remains the same based on this map. But this is a very early, interesting look at 2028 and this new poll and how things are going. But the idea of Vance versus Newsom happening in 2028, based on this poll, seems to be a lot more of a likely scenario than it was just a few months ago. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe. If you did, leave a comment below. Tell me your thoughts on this video. Do you think Gavin Newsom will be the Democratic nominee in 2028? I also have a new hypothetical scenario video for 2028 about J.D. Vance versus Gavin Newsom that just came out a few days ago. Make sure to go check that out. Thank you so much for watching. Again, please hit like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in a future video. Hello everyone, and welcome to today's video. Today we're talking about the 2026 Iowa Senate race, and an interesting question that's starting to come up, which is, now that Joni Ernst is not running for re-election, who will be the next Republican to represent the state of Iowa as the Republican nominee for Senate? And the first name that quickly comes to mind by many is Representative Ashley Hinson of the 2nd District. I also did a video yesterday talking in part about Ashley Hinson and the prospects of her candidacy, as well as her being a close ally of Joni Ernst. But this video, I also want to focus on another name that could potentially be very interesting, and that is close Trump ally Matthew Whitaker, who is now the U.S. ambassador to NATO, who also ran for the Senate back in 2014 when Joni Ernst first won the Republican primary and went on to be the nominee and then eventually the U.S. Senator. So this is interesting because the consensus has kind of been that Ashley Hinson is essentially like the Republican senator in waiting in Iowa, that if Joni Ernst decided not to run, Hinson would almost immediately jump in this race, and she would likely be the favorite starting out. But what is interesting also is Matthew Whitaker is a very close ally of President Trump. Now, just to show you the 2014 results here when Joni Ernst won this Republican primary, it was not very close at all. Joni Ernst got first place, 56.2% of the vote. Matthew Whitaker was down here in 4th place at 7.5%. The main difference this time around, though, if Whitaker decided to jump in, is Whitaker would probably have the backing of President of the United States, Donald Trump. Trump appointed him to be U.S. ambassador to NATO, and he appointed him in his first term as acting attorney general for a little bit during that term as well. So Whitaker is clearly a top ally of President Trump, that if he decided to leave his post as ambassador to NATO and run for the Senate race, there would be a very real possibility that President Trump may make the endorsement for Whitaker in this race, especially considering Hinson is a close ally of Joni Ernst, who President Trump and Joni Ernst have not always seen eye to eye on every single issue, most notably the Pete Hegseth confirmation as Secretary of Defense back, I believe that was in January. So it could be a very interesting situation that could happen if Matthew Whitaker decided to jump in to the Senate race in Iowa. Now, as for right now, though, that's speculation. Whitaker has not given any public indication if he's interested in running for Senate or not. He is on the Wikipedia page listed as a potential candidate, but has not yet given any clear nod that he's leaning towards entering this race or not. So until then, Ashley Hinson probably will be the Republican candidate. Now, it should be worth noting 2 Republicans are currently in this race. Jim Carlin and Joshua Smith, both of them entered this race before Joni Ernst dropped out, so they are still running, but the odds are that neither one of them will be the Republican nominee. It'll likely be someone that has a little bit more name recognition, like Ashley Hinson, or maybe even Matthew Whitaker, depending. Now, on the Democratic side, things are also very interesting, as it is a completely wide open primary on that side as well. So not only will Iowa's Republican primary be competitive, but the Democratic primary is also very competitive. Nathan Sage, the first Democrat to enter this race, is still running. Jackie Norris, the former chief of staff to First Lady Michelle Obama, is running in this race. Josh Turek, state representative from the 20th District, is running. And Zach Waltz, a state senator from the 43rd District in Iowa, is also running in this race. So this is a very competitive race right now. Already one candidate has dropped out. J.D. Scholten has dropped out of this race and given his endorsement to Josh Turek in this race. So he is the most notable endorsement on that one. Zach Waltz has the endorsement of former Representative Dave Losbeck of the Iowa 2nd District, has endorsed Zach Waltz. Waltz also has the endorsement of former Governor of Vermont, Howard Dean. You may recognize him from the video where he went, like, we're going to take back the White House, and like that scream that he's very famous for. He has endorsed him. And Patty Judge, the former governor of Iowa from 2007 to 2011, is also giving him the endorsement as well as 4 other state senators, and Tim Dwight, former NFL and University of Iowa football player. So this Democratic primary is going to be very fascinating to watch for as well and see how this all plays out. As for the general election, actually, it should be worth noting there is a Libertarian candidate, Thomas Lane, in this race that could potentially play an interesting role, as Libertarian votes in Joni Ernst's races have actually taken a pretty large percentage of the vote when she was running in past races. Now, the rankings for this have not been updated since this news has broken. It is currently listed as likely Republican right now. I'm not sure if it's going to go from likely Republican down to lean Republican now that Ernst is not in this race. I personally, my own rankings, don't think it shifts much. I think it remains likely Republican, but that could potentially happen in the coming days. Joni Ernst, currently in the early polling when she was running, was leading in a very close race against the Democratic opponents, but now that she is not running, and all the polls came from the Democratic public policy polling, so we really don't have too much information to go off of in this race, especially now that Ernst is not running. Now, the reason Republicans are likely going to feel very optimistic about Iowa is how much of a Republican state it has become in the last 10 years or so. 2024, President Trump just won this state by 13.2%. That is a likely Republican win, though very close to being a safe Republican win. Just to give you an idea, Missouri, neighboring, voted by 18.4%. Nebraska, the state itself, voted 20.5%. And Iowa voted right here by 13.2%. So Iowa certainly seems to be more of a likely Republican state than it does to be the toss-up state that would vote for the Democrats that it was even like 15 years ago. I voted for Trump by that much. In 2020, I voted for Trump by 8 points, which maybe if Democrats in 2028 can get back to this margin, maybe they may be able to put more of a fight in Iowa going forward. 2016, I voted for Trump by 9.4% against Hillary Clinton. Now, at the Senate level, we saw the last Senate race in 2022 where Republican Chuck Grassley won re-election by 12.2%, another very strong likely win. Now for 2020, the last time Joni Ernst was up, she won by 6.5% against Democrat Teresa Greenfield, getting 51.74% to 45.15%. And also, as I mentioned, is worth noting, the Libertarian candidate in that race, Rick Stewart, ended up getting about 2.21% of the vote in that race. So a third-party candidate running at all, like a Libertarian candidate, could be very big and could also take votes away from the Republican if the Republican, like Ernst, has popularity issues of sorts. This race was also very interesting back in 2020, as going into the final few days, the polling averages actually showed a very, very competitive race. Joni Ernst was only leading in the final polling average from Real Clear Politics by about 1.4%, which would just barely be in the lean Republican category, including the last 4 polls conducted from Data for Progress, Civics Daily Costs, Change Research, and Public Policy Polling, all having this race as a narrow lead for Teresa Greenfield. Now, Ann Seltzer in the Des Moines Register poll that had the very infamous poll from 2024 that ultimately ended up being very inaccurate in the state of Iowa. In the 2020 Senate race, it actually was pretty good. It had Joni Ernst up by 4 points, 46 to 42, still with 11% undecided in that one. But it's very interesting to see how close this race really was, and the actual results being about 6 points. When she first got elected back in 2014, Joni Ernst won by about 8.3% against the Democrat Raley. Now, in this race, similarly, we also saw an independent candidate, Rick Stewart, who was the Libertarian that ran again in 2020, got about 2.37%. And this one, Ernst got 52%. The Democrat Raley got 43.76%. So it's going to be interesting to watch this race in 2026, as this will be the first time we've seen the Senate race up in a year that should be really good for the Democrats. 2020, obviously, Joe Biden did end up winning, but President Trump also won at the top of the ticket, the state of Iowa, by a pretty significant margin. So this Senate race will be up in a Democratic midterm year. When it was Joni Ernst, Democrats were feeling very optimistic, as they viewed her as more of a vulnerable senator. Without Joni Ernst in this race, though, things are going to be very interesting here. I think it starts out as likely Republican in between 5 and 15 points. It's possible Democrats could try and make a play for Iowa. Now that Joni Ernst is not running, though, they're not going to have as unpopular of a Republican to run against, and given Iowa is a lot more of a likely Republican state than the battleground state at this current point in time, at least at the Senate and presidential level, I think Republicans probably hold on here by a minimum of 5% and anywhere between 5 and 15 at this point in time. The governor's race may be a different story, but at the Senate level, I think it's going to remain in Republican hands without really too much of a problem for the GOP. But I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to leave all your thoughts in the comment section down below, what you think about this video. Who do you think will be the Republican nominee to replace Joni Ernst in the Senate, and who will be the Democrats? I think the Democrats could beat them. Leave all your thoughts down below. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in a future video. Hello everyone, and welcome to today's video. Today we're talking about the 2026 Arizona governor's race, where a new poll has come out that shows how well the Republican candidates do against Democratic incumbent governor Katie Hobbs. So, reading this article by Newsweek, it discusses a little bit more that the Arizona's incumbent Democratic governor, Katie Hobbs, has a slim lead over her two potential Republican rivals ahead of her re-election battle in November of 2026. So in 2022, a little backstory here, Katie Hobbs nearly defeated the Republican rival, Kari Lake, a hardline Trump supporter, to become Arizona's governor, winning with 50.3% of the vote to Kari Lake's 49.7% of the vote. So super, super close. I have those election results to look at in just 1 second. Securing re-election in a state that backed President Trump with 52.2% of the vote in November of 2024 would be a major victory for Hobbs and the wider Democratic Party in the state of Arizona. The poll, which is conducted by Noble Predictive Insights, this has been a very popular pollster that's come up in the state of Arizona in a lot of recent polls, found that of 948 registered voters between August 8th and 11th, that the Republican Karen Taylor Robson, an attorney and former member of the Arizona Board of Regents, is the official Republican candidate. Hobbs would secure roughly 40% of the vote against 38% for Robson, while 19% of the surveyed said they were not sure who they would vote for in this scenario, and 4% selected a third-party candidate. Now, for contrast, U.S. Representative Andy Biggs, a House Republican, if he were to become the GOP nominee, Hobbs would get 39% of the vote compared to 37% for Biggs. Again, another 19% responded not sure, and 4% opted for a third party. It also showed glimpses at the Republican primary as well, which I'll be covering in just one moment. And on the other hand, it also showed that the poll found that 34% of Arizona voters had a favorable impression of Robson against 30% who viewed her unfavorably, overall +4. For Biggs, 27% of the voters viewed him favorably to 26% unfavorably, giving him an approval of about +1. So that's very interesting as well. As Biggs started out with the momentum in this race, now things seem to be shifting a little bit. Robson previously ran for the Republican nomination for Arizona governor ahead of the 2022 election, but ultimately lost to Kari Lake. So this is very interesting. And talking about this race for Arizona governor, well, first what we could do, if you want, we could look at the primary from 2022 in Arizona, just to give you an idea of what this looked like. Because this Republican primary between Kari Lake and Karen Taylor Robson was actually very close. Kari Lake ended up getting 47.97% of the overall vote. Karen Taylor Robson got 43.13%. Overall, roughly a little bit under 5% difference between Lake and Robson. And certainly that's very close by election standards, but also by a primary standard, that's also very close. Of 831,500 or so votes cast, only a margin of roughly 40,000 votes separated Lake and Karen Taylor Robson. And given how the election turned out, with Kari Lake and many of her stances that off-put a lot of independent and more McCain-style Republicans in the state of Arizona, if Karen Taylor Robson were the nominee, perhaps she would have had a stronger chance at defeating Katie Hobbs in this race. But regardless, we're talking about 2026, now that Hobbs is the governor. And in the early goings of this race, Katie Hobbs, has filed paperwork to run for governor again. She's not officially declared that she will, but it's looking like she probably will. On the Republican side, the two Republicans in this race are U.S. Representative Andy Biggs and Karen Taylor Robson, who is running again to try and be the Republican nominee for governor. A bunch of other Republicans have all filed paperwork to run, though none of them are as high profile as Biggs and Robson, meaning it will likely be one of Robson or Biggs that becomes the Republican nominee. It should also be worth noting there's a very interesting wrinkle happening in this race, which is that President Donald Trump has actually co-endorsed Andy Biggs and Karen Taylor Robson in this race. To give you a little bit of context, back in, I want to say it was December, President Trump endorsed Karen Taylor Robson in this race, and then when Andy Biggs entered the race a few months later, President Trump issued a statement saying he co-endorsed both of them, that they were both fantastic candidates, and he would support both of them in the Republican primary and to be the Republican nominee. So it's a very unusual situation at President Trump that we haven't really seen too much before. We did see, I believe it was the 2022, I want to say it was governor's race, or maybe senator's, I think it was governor's race, where Trump said he would be endorsing both candidates with the same first name. I think it was both named Mike. so one of the mics would win. That's the way President Trump did it in that race. So it's not necessarily something he hasn't done before, but it was very much of an interesting situation to see Trump endorse them both. So this Republican primary thus far looked like it was actually Andy Biggs's to really win and not have too much of a problem. The first poll from NecoPac had Andy Biggs leading 71-14. Pulse Decisions Science, a poll sponsored by Club for Growth, had Biggs leading over Robson 45-16. K-Strat had Biggs up 57-25, and NextGen P, another Republican poll, had Biggs up 49-26. Noble Predictive Insights, this is the first poll that's shown Karen Taylor Robson leading Andy Biggs, Robson getting 37% and Biggs getting 27%. So two things is happening here. One, this is the highest amount of support Karen Taylor Robson has gotten in a Republican primary poll in this governor's race in Arizona. It's also the lowest amount of support Andy Biggs has gotten at 27% in this poll and 36% undecided. So this can mean a few things. For one, this also, only second to the Pulse Decision Science poll, has the most amount of undecided voters left. So this could be a situation where this is a real turning point in the Republican primary race here, that maybe a lot of Arizona Republicans are starting to coalesce around Karen Taylor Robson in this race. Or it could be this poll ultimately ends up being an outlier and Andy Biggs is still the favorite to be the Republican nominee. But we're going to have to wait and see how this all plays out. Certainly I'm waiting for more polls to come out of this race before making a certain definitive statement. But it is interesting this is the first poll that shows Karen Taylor Robson winning. But still, with 36% undecided left of the vote and still this basically being a two-person race, this is going to be a very interesting one to watch for, because this race very well may be a repeat of what we saw in 2022, where it may end up being only a 4 or 5 point difference in the Republican primary. So that's certainly very interesting to watch for. So we know who the Democrat candidate is. We know it's Katie Hobbs. The Republicans will put up one of Andy Biggs or Karen Taylor Robson. Libertarian candidate Barry Hess has filed paperwork, and the Green primary, they do have the Green Party. 3 candidates have filed paperwork to run as well. This is going to be one of the closest governor's races in all of the United States for 2026. Cook Political Report, Inside Elections, and Sablo Crystal Ball all have it listed as a toss-up. Race to the White House has it listed as tilt Democrat. For both Hobbs and Biggs, the early polling hasn't been all that different. The two most recent polls, both are from Noble Predictive Insights, back in May. For Hobbs versus Biggs, it was a 2-point lead, 40-38. Now in this one in August, it's 39-37 for Hobbs versus Biggs. Again, really not that much of a difference. The only real differences here is that from going from May to August, the third-party vote went down by about 1 point. The undecided vote did go up by about 3, though. Hobbs loses 1 point of support, as well as Andy Biggs in that. But so far, there's been about 5 polls conducted, and all 5 polls for Hobbs versus Biggs, 4 out of the 5 have Hobbs leading over Andy Biggs. The only one that didn't was Crete Strategies, a Republican poll sponsored by American Encore, which is a Republican poll, showed Biggs leading 44-43 with still 13% undecided. So at this current point in time, it looks like there's a large amount of undecided vote left, and it's really too early to make a definitive statement about which candidate is leading in my own personal rankings here, other than the fact I can say at this current point in time, Katie Hobbs has about a point or 2 lead or so. Because there has been a mix of partisan polls or nonpartisan polls like Noble Predictive Insights and Republican polls as well. But ironically, the Republican poll showed it down 4 for the race, whereas the nonpartisan poll showed a 2-point race. So it's going to be very close, no doubt. It's really hard to gauge where this race is right now, but it does seem that Katie Hobbs is leading by about a 1 to 2 point margin at this current point in time with a lot of undecided vote left out there. And that's for Hobbs versus Biggs. For Hobbs versus Karen Taylor Robson, things really aren't that different. For this Noble Predictive Insight poll, Hobbs has 1% more support at 40%, but Karen Taylor Robson also has 1% more at 38%, 4% other, and 18% undecided in this one. And this is pretty consistent as well with the Andy Biggs polls, the only difference being in the Crete Strategies poll, Hobbs leads over Robson by 2 points in that one. So it's very interesting here. It shows this is definitely a very close race, that both Hobbs and whoever the Republican is, being Karen Taylor Robson or Andy Biggs, are capable of winning. But at this current point in time, Hobbs does have about a 2-point lead or so, depending on the poll, and there's really too much undecided vote to make a definitive statement about which candidate is going to win in November of 2026, which is why Arizona is going to be one of the closest governor's races to watch for in the country in 2026. And looking at the recent election results really makes sense. As I mentioned, in 2022, the state went for Katie Hobbs by 0.67% of the vote. Just to give you an idea of what this looked like, Katie Hobbs getting 50.33, Kari Lake 49.67. Hobbs got 1,287,891 votes. Kari Lake got 1,270,774 votes. Only about 17,000 votes of the 2.5 million votes cast. Only 17,000 votes separated Katie Hobbs and Kari Lake in this race. What an incredibly, incredibly close race in the state of Arizona. And if you're a returning viewer of mine, or if you're a new viewer of mine, one of the most important counties, not just in Arizona, but in the entire United States, for determining elections is right here in Maricopa County. This election's gotten a lot of media attention, particularly in the 2020 election, where the results took a very long time to come in, even days after the presidential election. But Maricopa County is one of the most important counties to watch for in elections in the state of Arizona. And what ended up happening was Katie Hobbs defeated Kari Lake here by about 2%, 51-49. And the margins here were enough to narrowly give Katie Hobbs the governor's race over Kari Lake. 790,352 votes for Hobbs, Kari Lake 752,714 votes. Just quick math here, this is roughly about 38,000 votes net margin for Katie Hobbs in Maricopa County. Again, the margin overall statewide was only about 17,000. So Maricopa County made the difference in this race between being a Democratic or Republican win. The margin of victory came out of Maricopa County. Let's compare this to 2024. President Trump flips the state of Arizona from 2020. Joe Biden narrowly won the state. I'll be getting to that margin in just one moment. President Trump wins Arizona by 5 points. A large reason being President Trump won Maricopa County 51-48, a 3-point win. Trump getting 1,051,000 votes. Kamala Harris getting 980,000 votes. Roughly 70,000 votes margin of victory for Trump in Maricopa County. And overall, statewide, Trump ended up winning by a lot more than 70,000 votes. But Maricopa County is a very important county that makes the difference for which party wins or loses. Again, just to show you what it looked like in 2020 when Joe Biden narrowly defeated President Trump, 49.36%, Trump got 49.06% here. Maricopa County voted for Joe Biden by about 2.2% in this one. So again, right around that 2% number seems to be where Maricopa County is going. It just depends if it's President Trump and the Republicans or Democrats like Katie Hobbs and Joe Biden. So Maricopa, all eyes are on that county for the 2026 governor's race. For the governor's map right now, unsurprisingly, Arizona is in one of my most closely watched governor's races for 2026 in the toss-up category. Going to be one of the closest states to watch for right now. At the start of the year, my first predictions for 2026, I actually did have this race as a tilt for the GOP, tilt Republican, meaning an under 1 point GOP win. And I certainly do think that's possible. But at this current point in time, I do have Katie Hobbs narrowly holding on and winning by under 1 point at this current moment. I think this race is incredibly close. Both parties certainly could win this race. But I do think Katie Hobbs is a very slight advantage at this current point in time, as still about a year and a quarter out, none of the Republicans have really made up enough ground to really put it in a situation where Katie Hobbs looks like she's in trouble. Still a lot of undecided vote left out there, but Katie Hobbs right now is a very slight lead in this race, and I think she barely holds on by under 1 point like she did back in 2022. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did. Leave a comment below, tell me your thoughts, and any other statements you want to make about this video or anything discussed in this, please do so all down below. Thank you so much for watching. Again, please remember to hit like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in a future video.